Do you want to know how peasants in ancient Egypt built their houses from scratch? They basically made houses out of crap, literally. Mud mixed with straw, sometimes even dung. Then they stomped it by foot, molded it, baked it in the sun, and then hoped it held up for another flood season. Building a house in ancient Egypt was a team sport. In a rural village, a single peasant family simply couldn't handle digging mud, molding bricks, and carrying beams all by themselves. So, neighbors, cousins, friends, they all pitched in to raise the house. They'd help with the heavy stuff that's hard to do alone. And this help wasn't exactly paid in cash, but in favors. You help me build. I'll help you later. Simple. Women joined in too, bringing water, stomping straw into the mud, even carrying bricks and mortar. It became a family affair. Kids carried materials, men laid bricks. And these patterns aren't just ancient. Modern village life in Egypt shows the same kind of teamwork. It's like a communal construction party that never ends. And they made homes from what was on hand. You see the Nile's annual flood left behind rich mud. Mix that with sand from the desert and bits of straw from the harvest, and boom, you've got brick mix that resists cracking. They also used wooden molds, simple rectangular frames, to shape bricks around 30 to 40 centimeters long, 15 to 20 centimeters wide, 10 centimeters thick. Brick sat baking in the sun for days, flipped after about 3 days for even drying, and by about a week they were ready to build with. And this was all manual work we're talking about. You didn't really need to be a master craftsman, just a farmer who knew his mud. Indeed, mud brick making was a village-wide skill. Everyone knew how, so in many ways, it also built community. Now, although their toolkit was pretty basic, you'd be surprised at how astonishingly far they got with that. One account claims 4 men molded around 3,000 bricks in a single day. In a single day. And this is without any power tools. So, yeah, elbow grease. But mud bricks weren't the only materials. Reeds and rushes from the Nile's edge did double duty, reinforcing walls, thatching roofs, or lining partitions. Wood was sort of scarce. There weren't any big oak beams. So, they scavenged date palm trunks and acacia logs nearby for roof supports and door frames. Even short, rough pieces could carry a flat room roof. They also rounded up stones or pebbles for foundation pads, door sills, or to firm up muddy floors. And forget about cutting stone blocks. That was elite stuff. It never saw much in a peasant home. Maybe one limestone threshold slab or some reused stones at the base of the walls for extra strength. But that was it. Mostly, a commoner's house was a combination of mud, straw, and reeds. Strong enough, but kind of disposable in the long run. And as we've touched on earlier, construction started once the Nile's flood waters had receded. That's when the earth was firm and supplies were ready. The family or community would often pick a spot, usually where an old house had collapsed, or slightly above the flood zone. Then they cleared debris, leveled the ground, and sometimes laid down sand, pebbles or broken potsherds to insulate the floor from moisture. In some cases, they even built a footing, the first layer using stones or potsherds, and that lifted the mud walls off the damp earth. It was simple, but labor-intensive. Very effective, though. And it was built by a village. Usually they marked the house's outline with pegs and string, or by scratching lines in the soil. They didn't need high-tech tools. For instance, right angles were most likely. Eyeballed, measured with a knotted cord if they wanted extra help. A simple plumb bob, which was a weight on a string, kept walls from leaning like a tipsy camel. Mostly, however, peasant builders followed instinct. No formal blueprints needed, just years of mucking about. We even see it in the tomb murals of Vizier Rekhmir from around 1450 BC. Folks squishing Nile mud in pits, stacking bricks, carrying baskets, pretty much rush hour building in ancient style. And on site, each brick was laid by hand, stuck together with a dab of wet mud. And nope, nails or metal ties weren't even used. Just good old sticky mud. A seasoned neighbor or foreman made sure the corners and doorways were straight and solid, and walls sometimes leaned inward slightly. A batter for stability, thick on the bottom, thinner on top. As for corners, they could be rounded or propped up with wooden posts. Sharp corners in mud brick tend to crumble, so better safe than sorry. And once walls hit waist height, they'd leave space for the door. For a simple hut, that meant a narrow opening, often topped with a wooden lintel or a couple of palm sticks as a bridge. A proper wooden door frame could be installed in more established homes. 2 jambs and a lintel, usually acacia or tamarisk, were set into the brickwork. And if they could afford it, families had a solid wood door panel. It hung on pivot pegs set into sockets in the threshold and lintel. But for many poorer households, timber was too costly and sort of scarce. So they used reed screens or woven mats as makeshift doors, especially indoors. As for windows, it was quite rare. Very rare, actually. Maybe a slim slit or a small vent high up near the roof, but with no glass. Often just a sticks or reeds grill to keep out curious folk. Yeah, privacy and security mattered, but also thick walls and tiny openings kept the inside cool, dim, and safe. However, as the walls climbed higher, the building process got tougher. So in that case, workers either stood on finished sections of the wall or on rudimentary scaffolding like wood planks, or even piles of mud bricks. That ancient text that we keep referring to in our episodes, the satire of the trades, it's got everything. It basically paints mud brick masonry as brutal work. Kidneys aching, out in the wind, lays bricks without even a loincloth, strength vanished through fatigue, needing all his excrement. Lovely, isn't it? That last bit likely hints that dung was mixed into the mud, too. But just imagine the mason for a moment. Mud-caked hands and feet, sun-baked skin, dust everywhere. But by the time the walls reached the full 2 to 3 meters of a 1-story peasant house, the crew was done. They just wanted that phase over. And then there was the actual roof. These were flat, mud and organic material laid over the wooden beams that we talked about earlier. Now, though we talked about the structural process before, in general, it's worth noting that most peasant homes tried to get their hands on short palm trunks, joists to span the rooms. And in tiny huts, they sometimes skipped the timber altogether. In that case, reeds could be bundled into rolls, tied into an arch, or made into a dome. But in many peasant homes, at least a couple of logs would serve as joists. They spaced them out, then layered reed mats, thatch, or smaller sticks on top. Then they'd spread a thick layer of mud over the beams and matting. Then they'd pack it tight, creating a solid, flat earthen roof. And if it's dry enough, great. You could walk or even sleep up there. And to keep the rare rain from settling, they'd give it a slight slope or low parapet edges. Rain wasn't really a big issue, but still, they planned for it. One carpenter jokingly warns, a month goes by in laying the beams and spreading the matting. So, yeah, that stage could drag, especially if timber was scarce, which was often the case. And when wood was not available, they sometimes built vaulted mud brick roofs, laying bricks inwards, row by row, until they met at the top. So no wooden support beams needed, just careful bricklaying. You'll still find barrel-vaulted rooms in New Kingdom storehouses. You'll even find them in houses too. But that was a specialist move. Most peasants stuck with flat, one-story roofs and whatever logs they scavenged. And once the roof was on, the house looked done. But not quite. You see, walls, inside and out, got a thin plaster coat to smoothen the joints. Better homes went further, a lime-based whitewash or gypsum plaster. It was shiny, bright, and helped reflect sunlight. As we mentioned in another episode, at Deir el Medina, they plastered walls white to beat the heat and keep bugs at bay. And as for furniture, they were minimal. Benches or storage niches were molded from mud brick into walls or stairways. A bench could be found along the main room, or a short flight of steps leading up to the roof. In Deir el Medina, archaeologists found staircases built into homes, roof access, or a small second floor that also hid storage underneath. And once the plaster dried, the house was basically done. The family moved in with reed mats, wooden stools, clay jars, and everyday things. So, from start to finish, a few weeks of hard, shared labor. And in the end, every pebble and brick was theirs. A home built by their hands from the earth itself.